It's a joy to be here. Thank you. How many of you have heard of Fannie Lou Hamer, Medgar Evers? What about Rosa Parks? Well, part of my argument is that it's quite possibly you would not have heard of some of these people had it not been for Dr. T.R.M. Howard. I know that's a shocking statement, but the fact of the matter is that even when he died in 1976, many people did not know about him and had not heard about him. But his name had not been mentioned in New York Times, nor Time Magazine, or even Ebony Magazine when he passed away. But in 1955, that was not the case. And in fact, he was given on an honor roll. In fact, he was the number one on the honor roll. And when you look at this honor roll, Martin Luther King, when you talk about civil rights leaders, is not even mentioned. And so Dr. Howard had won praise from the black press. The Chicago Defender. The Chicago Defender was probably a leading black magazine then and now. And so it is the Chicago Defender who ranks Dr. Howard number one. Now, unlike so many civil rights leaders, Howard was born in poverty, abject poverty, in Murray, Kentucky, 1908. His parents were tobacco twisters. And so his mother worked in the hospital, and so she got her son a job working for Dr. Will Mason. And as he worked, he showed himself to be diligent and a hard worker, and he caught his eye. So it was through Dr. Will Mason that Howard got the idea and the joy and the love for the Seventh-day Adventist church. Back then, even though these churches were segregated, they still allowed black membership. And so when Dr. Howard started working with, then he was Theodore Howard, started working with Dr. Mason, Dr. Mason encouraged him to go on to college and helped him pay for schooling at Oakwood College in Huntsville, Alabama, which again is another Seventh-day Adventist church. And as he goes on, he leaves Oakwood and he goes to Union College in Lincoln, Nebraska. He is then the only black student in the class. And one thing that we found is that, and he did this again when he came to California, to Loma Linda, he said that he would not eat with the whites. Because it's so segregated, he would get his food and go to a table and sit and eat alone. And if anybody wanted to come and sit with him, they could, but he would not force himself on the students. Howard showed a gift for gab. He entered a contest, the Anti-Saloon of America in Detroit. He come out with the number one prize for the best oration by a student. And he was 21 at the time. And what he was doing was defending prohibition, saying, of course, that alcohol is not good for you. And so as he made his presentation, he was standing in an all-white crowd, and they were so impressed with him. They gave him, eyewitness reports said that they gave him a standing ovation that lasted for quite some time. And Howard earned his medical degree not in 1934, but in 1935, as the only African American in the graduating class of the College of Medical Evangelists in Loma Linda, California. Of course, it's Loma Linda University and a sister university, is that true? And on the day of his graduation, he marries Helen Boyd. Helen Boyd comes from a wealthy, that's a picture of them, I guess, getting ready to make the speech. There she is. Helen Boyd comes from a wealthy black family in Riverside, California, and she introduces Dr. Howard to the black elite. By him coming up in a poor family, now he gets a chance to mingle with the wealthy. And her brother, Edward Boyd, becomes the first black executive for Pepsi-Cola Company in New York. He lived in New York until he passed away recently. And so after they marry, and Dr. Howard is getting ready to start his medical career, he comes to Mount Bayou, Mississippi in 1942. He's accepted as the chief surgeon of the Taborian Hospital. The Taborian Hospital is the pride and joy in the Mississippi Delta of the International Order of 12 Knights and Daughters of Tabor. Now, these are fraternal societies, and they help to build the hospital. And a little background, I guess, on the Knights and Daughters of Tabor. They were founded by ex-slaves, and this is shortly after the Civil War. It was a fraternal society, and in most respects, both black and white fraternal societies, and some of them were like the Loyal Order of Moose, the Odd Fellows, the Masons, and the Polish National Alliance. All of these societies had things in common as fraternal societies. They had rituals, colorful drill teams. They organized around a system of lodges. And as you can see there, they're all dressed and nice and clean and neat. And this is, of course, before the rise of the welfare state. Fraternal organizations were leading providers of social welfare. I'll say that again. These people provided their own social welfare through a system of cooperative insurance that gave members and their families services like medical care, employment information, and also orphanages. The principles of the Knights and Daughters of Tabor, they pledged to advance Christianity, education, morality, temperance and the art of governing, self-reliance, and true manhood and womanhood. And my husband often says that we are so busy dividing people, we don't really look at what it is that we have in common, the common things. And so, in 1942, you have the Taborian Hospital. It included 2 major operating rooms, an X-ray room, sterilizer, incubator, electrocardiograph, blood bank, and a laboratory. And you had about 3 or 4 doctors on staff, and they were African-American doctors, all black. And back then, they would pay dues to use the hospital, about $1.20, well, $8.40. It's about $120 in today's market. And it entitled an adult member to 31 days of hospitalization, and the fee for a child was $1.20, about $17. So, of course, they met an enormous response in the Delta. People were coming from all over. And now we see Dr. Howard, not only did he spend a lot of time in the hospital, he also decided to become a businessman. Sharecroppers didn't make a lot of money. They were poor, but by them pooling their resources, they could create. And Dr. Howard did this. He started by creating, he broke off first of all with the Knights and Daughters of Tabor and created his own fraternal society. And then he decided to open up the Taborian Hospital in Mount Bayou, Mississippi. What you're looking at now is his farm. He ended up having I think 120-acre farm plantation of his own. And not only that, 1,600-acre cotton and cattle plantation. He had a restaurant. He also created a small zoo where he brought animals in from Africa so that these little children could see these animals. And this is him displaying his wealth, where he would invite people, and he had a maid and somebody to help him out. And this is all in the Mississippi Delta in the 1940s and 50s. He created a mutual life insurance company called the Magnolia Mutual Life Insurance Company. And of course, this was strictly for making money. And so, as he continued to build and create his businesses and create wealth for himself, he also turned his attention, before we turn his attention to civil rights, let me tell you a little bit about, this is a picture of the monkeys for the zoo. And this is where he had his Magnolia Mutual Life Insurance Company. And the Magnolia Mutual Life Insurance Company, I'll wait to tell you on that. This is an example of the board for his organization that he created, the Regional Council of Negro Leadership. This is the board, the group of board members. And this is Merle and Medgar Evers. When I said Medgar Evers, nobody's put your hand up, and I was sort of surprised. Medgar Evers was a slain civil rights leader. And the reason we say that you probably wouldn't have heard of him before now, not before now, but before Dr. Howard, is because shortly after college, Dr. Howard gave Medgar his very first job out of college, and he was selling insurance for Dr. Howard's company. His wife, Merle, would be the typist. And so what Medgar was doing, of course, was selling insurance from door to door and then trying to encourage people to register to vote. And Dr. Howard's company championed self-help, mutual aid, thrift, equal political rights. And they would weave together the ideas of Booker T. Washington as well as W.B. Du Bois, vowing to guide our people in their civic responsibilities regarding education, registration and voting, law enforcement, tax paying, and preservation of property, the value of saving in all things, which will make us stable, qualified, conscientious citizens. And this is Howard's new company. Now, as they worked, of course, his life turned towards civil rights. And they had this, don't buy gas where you can't use the restroom. So if they're not going to allow you to use the restroom, then you don't need to spend your money there. And this went afoul with the white citizens in the Mississippi Delta. And one thing I did want to share before we move on is when we talk about Merle Evers, before she passed away, and that was another thing about this research, what was wonderful, I got a chance to talk to Rosa Parks before she died, got a chance to spend time with Merle Evers, and she said of Dr. Howard that one look told you that he was a leader, kind, affluent, and intelligent, that rare Negro in Mississippi who has somehow beaten the system. And so as they put the bumper stickers out, they would have these big rallies, and they would bring famous people into the Mississippi Delta. They would bring congressmen and Mahalia Jackson. Anybody have heard of her, Mahalia Jackson? And these are pictures with the congressman as well as Mahalia Jackson in the Mississippi Delta. The council, first of all of this was before. Don't buy gas where you can't use the restroom. This is going to that idea of separate but equal. And it wasn't really equal because you could buy gas, but you couldn't use the restroom. So this was all about maybe 4 years before the Montgomery bus boycott. And so it worked, of course, because the white people decided that, okay, if you're not going to buy gas, then we're not going to loan you money to pay your bills. And if you can't have money to pay your bills, then what are you going to do? And so Dr. Howard stepped up. That's a picture of Fannie Lou Hamer. And here's a picture of him and Roy Wilkins, who was, of course, the NAACP director, coming to the aid of these slain people. What they did was they took the money to the bank in Memphis, Tri-State Bank, and they would loan money to blacks to get them through this credit squeeze, and it worked. And so then they started making separate bathrooms, a bathroom for blacks, a bathroom for whites. So at least when you stopped to get gas, you could use the bathroom now. And so this is Dr. Howard coming to the rescue. After the murder of Emmett Till, do you know the story of Emmett Till? Everybody knows that story. They do? Oh, they do. They do not. Oh, okay. Emmett Till was he just turned 14. That's one thing that amazed me in the trial. They kept calling him a man, and he just turned 14. Came from Chicago to spend the summer with his great uncle, Mose Wright. And he was going to pick cotton, and then they go and get a soda or something at the store and kind of hang out. And so he had this little, like a brand new wallet. And he said, oh, in Chicago, I got me a white girlfriend. They said, yeah, right, man, you don't have a white girlfriend, cut it out. Oh, yes, I do. And said, well, if you got it going on like that, go in there and say something to that white lady in the store. So he says, okay. So he goes in, and what he did from all accounts is that instead of putting the money on the table, he put it in her hand. Instead of not looking at her in the face, he looked at her in the face. And worse than that, he said something to the effect of something baby. And that was just too far gone. And they got him out of the store, and they were afraid for his life. And sure enough, when her husband and his half-brother came back to town, they went, as a matter of fact, I remember this date, August the 28th, 1955, before a day in the morning, because that's my birthday. I am 63 years old, 63. I guess I'm trying to get there really fast. And they drug him out, and they accosted him. They beat him so badly. When I talked to her mother about her son, after 50 years, and this was back in 2005, her voice broke when she talked about what they did to her son. They beat him, and they chopped him up with cleavers like across his nose, and he was unrecognizable by the time they finished. And when they took him to the river to tie a gin fan around his neck to throw him in the river, they said to him, boy, do you still think that black folks are just as good as white folks? He said, yes. And they blew his brains out. And then they threw him in the Tallahatchie River, expecting him to sink to the bottom, but he didn't. A little boy, somebody saw his foot sticking out of the water, and it went to court, and Dr. Howard was active in the case trying to find witnesses, and he said that finding somebody guilty or taking them to trial for killing a black person in Mississippi is about like shooting a deer out of season. It wasn't important at all. And he argued back and forth with J. Edgar Hoover because the FBI didn't get into the case. And he even got in some trouble with the governor because in a meeting with the governor, the governor was talking about, do you think that if I told you that, that blacks would not want to go to heaven, would you believe that? And Dr. Howard said something smart about him. And when he said something smart back to the governor, the newspaper said to them, this Dr. Howard has called our governor a liar. And so he went afoul with the Mississippians during this time. And what that meant, of course, was that he was on a death list. What that also meant was that the police pulled his wife over, and there's reports of her being slapped around. Also, he decides that it's probably time for him to get out of Mississippi. But before he leaves Mississippi, what he has done is he has built businesses, probably about 4 or 5 or 6. He has become a millionaire. We went into the court documents to try to track down just how much money he was worth by the time he left. And so when you think about coming out of poverty and working and creating a life and making a life for yourself through business, he did that. And then he ran for office, so he had some political desires. He didn't win, but he did run for office. And then at the end of his, close to the end of his life, I don't know why this is not working anymore. Oh, there it is. This is a picture of him standing, I think in Philadelphia is that picture, talking about the Till case after the 2 men have been acquitted. And one thing is when we talk about so many people came to hear him, this is proof that so many people did indeed come to hear him. Now, this picture is fun for me because when we made the statement starting out that you may not have heard of Rosa Parks if it possibly hadn't been for Dr. Howard, because he spoke to her in the church, invited there by Martin Luther King 4 days before she refuses to give up her seat and start that Montgomery bus boycott. This is a newspaper story that tells November 27th that he was there and he was speaking. So this is proof that he was in Alabama speaking. And December 1st, I think it was the day that she didn't, 4 days later. And this is him with Eisenhower showing his prominence. And once he left Mississippi, he went to Chicago, Illinois, on the west side, and he created, this is cartoon of him fighting with J. Edgar Hoover. They fought in print. Dr. Howard would write him a letter, and J. Edgar Hoover would write him back, arguing about why is it that the federal government did not get into the case. I must say that a few years back, the federal government did come, and I talked to some of the FBI agents, asking about our research and asking about whether or not they should reopen the case. And my take was so many of the people that had done this were long since dead. But they did exhume the body. And his cousin said the thing that it did for them more than anything else was prove that it really was their cousin, Emmett Till, because they couldn't believe that that was him. He looked so bad. They couldn't believe that that was his body. And so once they exhumed the body, they proved that that really was him. And that was even the politics of the day. The sheriff and all would say, no, Dr. Howard has gotten a cadaver out of his business. That's not Emmett Till. That's somebody that Dr. Howard's trying to pump up to say that that's him. And so when the federal government went in, it proved that it really was Emmett Till. And it gave some closure, I think, to those cousins that had been with him during that tragic night or evening back in 1955. That was a picture of Dr. Howard in his safari room. When he got to Chicago, he built this wonderful mansion on South Side Chicago. He created a new hospital, built another hospital in Chicago, and he would go to Africa, and may not be politically correct, but he would hunt and put his trophies in his house, and people would come to visit and to see. And this is his basement. And one thing about that basement that was important, this is Jesse Owens. You know who Jesse Owens was? Olympic champion, gold medalist, Jesse Owens. He's crowning Dr. Howard king of the party, king of the holiday. In Dr. Howard's basement, Operation Push with Jesse Jackson was created and invented. So Dr. Howard had his hands in a little bit of everything, to be honest with you. And back up, this is Betty Shabazz, Malcolm X's wife. When he was assassinated, Dr. Howard raised money to help feed her children. And this is an idea of Dr. Howard when he opened the new clinic in Chicago. They dressed in the traditional Nightingale outfits. And as you can see Dr. Howard walking through in his all white, they said he was a stickler for looking good. He would change an outfit maybe once every 2 or 3 times a day. I take that back. 3 times a day he would change. And so this is him walking in his new clinic. This is, I went too far. Almost through. This is the clinic, the group in Chicago, and daughter sitting in front of him. And that daughter has since passed away, and a lot of the information we received, we got from her firsthand before she died. This is another look at the safari room. One thing about the safari room, not only did he go to Africa, killing those innocent animals, he also brought back individuals to educate them. He brought them back and he paid for their education. So he did more than just take out the lions, tigers. And this is his gravestone. He died in 1976 from a heart attack. And if I had to sum it up, why is it that I would even want to tell you about this man? The Mississippi Delta, and still is, very, very poor. He went into an all-black town, created a hospital that took care of so many. He did thousands and thousands of operations. And not only that, some of the whites even would bring their people there for him to take care of. And he made a difference in the lives of so many, and he made a difference in the whole state of Mississippi. He built the first swimming pool for blacks in the whole state of Mississippi. And so the last thing that I'll say about Dr. Howard is this. When we wrote the book, we had to tell it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because when we do research, you have to be honest. And so I may not have told you all the bad, but maybe buy the book and read about it. But the fact of the matter is, he is a man worth knowing about. He is or was a Seventh-day Adventist that believed in the principles of the church. And I don't know, I think his influence on the civil rights movement was just marvelous. It's a marvelous influence. Thank you very much.
All right, so I think it's really remarkable when somebody who's a product of course, of Loma Linda University and of Oakwood and Union has this kind of impact without, frankly, a lot of us having been very much aware of this. And I'm so delighted. I was just ecstatic when I discovered the story that Linda and David tell in their book. We have a few minutes for you to ask more questions about aspects of this story that might be especially interesting to you. Anybody want to pose some questions? It's a great opportunity, I think, to get really firsthand information about a great story. Yeah, please.
All right. So my question is, at least I heard this, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but a few years ago, the lady who pretty much accused Emmett Till of whatever happened on her deathbed, she admitted she lied about it. Is that actually true, or?
That's still up for debate. And the reason it's up for debate is when we tried to interview her, she would not take an interview. And then C-SPAN or CNN, I think CNN went to see her. She would not interview them. And then the young man who said she gave him the interview. We're having some issues with finding the documents. With the work that we've done, even the interviews and the telephone calls that we had with all these famous people, that information, part of it is at Oakwood College, and the other part of it is down in Mississippi, at Cleveland. So again, if you did it and you got her to say that, you should have evidence. And so there's some problems with the evidence. So I don't know, to be honest. We've talked to him, and we thought it was wonderful, but there's some questions about it.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah.
Hi, you mentioned that you spoke with Rosa Parks. I was just curious, what were some of the questions you asked her?
That's a good question. We talked about when she was sitting there and deciding not to get up, deciding I'm done, I'm not getting up, I'm not moving. We asked her, was Till on her mind? She said yes, she was thinking about that. She said, she talked to us even before we asked questions and gave information. She said that, of course, she'd been working with the group all along. She'd been the secretary. They had previously wanted somebody else to kind of make a stand, but for reasons like morality and stuff like that, they couldn't do it. And her husband didn't really want her to be that involved in it. And so it wasn't planned out. Some people say, well, they planned it. It was not. That particular day, she said she was just worn out, tired, and that was the day. So that was the kind of conversation we had with her. And that's been a few years back. I have to think back, to what all was said. We talked about the arrest and going into jail. One thing that I'd like to just say that you all may know already, and that is the civil rights movement would not have been as wonderful as it was had we not had whites working with blacks in order to accomplish this. When the people decided not to ride the buses and not to go into town, these white women needed these maids. They needed them to come and clean their houses and take care of their children. They got in their cars and they went to get them, to bring them to work. You had blacks who had cars that would go and get people and shuffle them back and forth to work so that they refused to ride those buses and that it would be successful. So it was a team effort. This is a sidebar, but I think it's something interesting. During that time, there was a white female at Stillman College from California. She said that she had come to Stillman to go to school for a year when all of this was happening. And then her and her mom was watching the television and they saw the riots and they couldn't believe how people were treating other people. And her mother came to Alabama, came to Selma, came because of what they saw on television. And I think that a lot of that happened all over. People were coming in on buses, trains, coming into Alabama from all over during this time. And see, that's the difference between Mississippi and Alabama. Alabama had the television. You had the man in the window taking a picture and sending it out through the news network, and you're seeing police officers hitting and knocking and billy clubbing people. You didn't have the cameras in Mississippi, but Mississippi was ever cruel and harsh as anywhere during this time.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.